My mother called me on a Tuesday, not a Sunday when families tend to reach out of obligation, not a birthday, not a holiday, a Tuesday, in November. At 7:14 in the morning, when she knew I would be getting ready for work and would not have the emotional bandwidth to argue. I looked at my phone on the bathroom counter, her name on the screen, and I just stood there. Water still running, toothbrush still in my hand, that low hum of the exhaust fan, the smell of the lavender shampoo I had switched to after I moved out, because lavender was mine, not ours. I had not spoken to my mother in 22 months. I had not spoken to my brother Marcus in just over 2 years. I had not spoken to my father. Well, my father is a different story. And we will get to that. I let the call go to voicemail. Then I sat on the edge of the bathtub and waited. Because I knew. You do not get a call at 7:14 in the morning from a mother you have not spoken to in 22 months unless something has shifted, unless a number has come up somewhere, unless the thing they told you they did not need you for suddenly requires something only you can give. The voicemail was 43 seconds long. 38 of those seconds were my mother telling me how much the family missed me, how my grandmother's health was declining, how Marcus had really changed, how we needed to come together. The last 5 seconds were the only ones that mattered. There is a property deal, sweetheart. 1.2 million. And your name is still on the deed. There it is. And right there, in that lavender-scented bathroom in my apartment in Nashville, Tennessee, I understood exactly what was happening. Not because I was surprised, but because I had been waiting for this moment for 2 years. I had rehearsed what I would feel. Rage, vindication, maybe a little sadness. I did not expect to feel nothing. Nothing but the exhaust fan, nothing but the water running cold, and a very quiet, very calm thought forming in the back of my mind. They need me, and they have no idea what I am going to do with that. Let me take you back. Because if I do not show you who I was before all of this, none of what comes next is going to land the way it should. My name is Rachel. Rachel Diane Holloway. I grew up in Clarksville, Tennessee, which is about 45 minutes north of Nashville, in a house on a quiet street called Sycamore Ridge that smelled like dryer sheets and my mother's casseroles. My father, Gerald Holloway, was a contractor. A good one. The kind of man who built things with his hands and believed that property was the only honest investment a working person could make. He said that so often it became the family religion. Stocks are a gamble. Crypto is a fantasy. Land is land. Land does not lie. My brother Marcus is 3 years older than me, and growing up, I genuinely believed he was one of the smartest people I had ever met. Not book smart, though he was that too, but street smart in the way that some people are just born knowing how to read a room, how to make a person feel heard, how to ask the right question at exactly the right moment. I admired that about him for a very long time. I think that is what made everything hurt the way it did. When I was 19, my father had a stroke. It was minor, the doctors said, a warning shot. But it changed something in the way he moved through the world. He walked slower. He got tired in the evenings, and he started talking, more seriously than before, about what would happen to what he had built. He had 3 properties by then. The house on Sycamore Ridge, which the family lived in, a rental duplex on Fortner Avenue in Clarksville, and a raw piece of land, 4.8 acres just outside of Pleasant View, that he had bought for next to nothing in 2003 because he just had a feeling about it. He called that piece of land his retirement plan. When I was 22, fresh out of Middle Tennessee State with a marketing degree and approximately $4,000 in savings, my father sat me down at the kitchen table, the one with the wobbly left leg that nobody ever fixed, and he said, "Rachel, I am going to put your name on the Pleasant View land with mine and Marcus. Equal thirds, because you are the one I trust to make sure things are done right." Not the most comforting compliment, but coming from Gerald Holloway, it was the closest thing to "I love you" that a piece of paperwork could say. I said yes. Of course I said yes. And I believed, genuinely believed, that this was the beginning of something for our family, something we would build together. I was a very different person then. The thing about loneliness is that it does not announce itself. It does not knock on the door. It just quietly moves into the space that other people left behind. And by the time I was 25, I was lonely in a way I did not have the vocabulary for yet. I had moved to Nashville for a marketing job at a mid-size healthcare company. My friends from college were scattering. I was spending my weekends driving back to Clarksville to help my mother, because Marcus was always busy. Always had something going on. Always had a reason why this particular weekend did not work. I told myself that was just Marcus being Marcus, that he was ambitious, that he was building something. I told myself a lot of things. Here is the thing about being the reliable one in a family. It feels like a compliment until you realize it is actually a job description. And nobody applied for it. You just got assigned. If you have ever been the one who always shows up, the one everyone calls when things fall apart, you already know exactly where this is going. And if this is hitting close to home, stick around, because it gets so much worse before it gets better. My father recovered well enough over the next few years. He slowed down but stayed sharp. And the Pleasant View land just sat there, growing in value as Pleasant View grew. A Walmart distribution center went up 2 miles away in 2018. A new subdivision broke ground across the highway in 2019. The land, which my father had paid $32,000 for, was suddenly worth something genuinely significant. My father knew it. Marcus knew it. I knew it. What I did not know, what I had no reason to suspect at that point, was that Marcus had known it for longer than the rest of us. And Marcus had been making plans. The first real fracture was in the spring of 2021. My father had started talking to a developer, a land development company out of Brentwood, nicer part of the Nashville metro area, called Summit Meridian Properties. They had been reaching out for a few years, but my father had always said no. He wanted to wait. He believed the land would continue to appreciate. In 2021, Summit Meridian came back with a number that made my father pay attention. $800,000 for 4.8 acres of raw land in Pleasant View, Tennessee. That was not nothing. That was a life-changing number for a family like ours. My father called a family meeting. Me, Marcus, my mother Linda, the 4 of us around that same kitchen table with the wobbly leg. And my father explained the offer. He wanted to discuss it together. He was old school that way. Decisions got made as a family. Marcus barely let him finish. Dad, 800 is too low. The market is moving. We should hold. Give it another 12 to 18 months and we are looking at $1 million. Easy. My father nodded slowly. He was considering it. I asked the question that apparently nobody else thought to ask. Marcus, have you had the land independently appraised recently? The table got quiet in a way that felt specific. Marcus looked at me with this expression I had seen before, but never fully catalogued. Patient, slightly condescending. The way a person looks at someone who has just asked a stupid question in a meeting, but they are too polite to say so out loud. Rachel, I have done the research. I know this market. Not a yes, not a no, just a redirection. I remember the smell of my mother's pot roast in the slow cooker on the counter. That warm, dense smell of meat and carrots that should have made the moment feel safe. It did not. My father sided with Marcus. We turned down the Summit Meridian offer. I went back to Nashville that evening with this low-grade discomfort I could not name. Like a song playing in another room. You can almost make out the melody, but not quite. I told myself I was being paranoid. Over the next several months, I started noticing things. Small things. The kind of things that, individually, mean nothing. But when you start keeping a list, even just a mental one, they start to form a shape. Marcus started having separate phone calls with my father. My mother would mention them casually. Oh, Marcus and your dad talked this week about the property. But when I asked my father about these calls, he would give me a vague, warm summary that somehow contained no actual information. In January 2022, Marcus suggested that he take over as the primary contact for any developers who reached out, since he was, and I am quoting here, more available to handle the business side of things. My father thought this was a good idea. My mother thought this was a good idea. I thought, I am on the deed. I am a third owner of this property. Why would I cede my right to be involved in conversations about it? But I said nothing. Because in our family, saying nothing had always been the price of keeping the peace. And I had been paying that price my whole life. I should have spoken up. I know that now. But when you have spent decades being told, in small and quiet ways, that your instincts are an overreaction, you learn to talk yourself out of what you see right in front of you. I really want to know, have you ever been in a situation where you saw something coming and you talked yourself out of trusting yourself? Drop it in the comments. Because I was not the only one, and I need to know I was not the only one. In March of 2022, something shifted more dramatically. Summit Meridian came back. Not with $800,000 this time. $1.1 million. I found out about this offer not from my father, not from Marcus. I found out because my father's attorney, a semi-retired man named Donald Park, who had handled my father's real estate documents for 20 years, called my cell phone to confirm my mailing address for some paperwork. What paperwork? I asked. A pause on the line. The specific pause of a man who has just realized he has said something he was not supposed to say. The preliminary documents related to the property sale discussion. Your brother said all 3 owners had been briefed. I had not been briefed. I sat in my car in the parking garage of my office building in Nashville. Level 3. The spot I always took because the yellow paint line on the left was faded, and it made me feel like I had a little extra room, and I just sat there with the engine off, listening to the parking garage hum. The distant sound of a car alarm somewhere on level 5. My brother was negotiating the sale of property that had my name on the deed. Without telling me. And either my father did not know that Marcus had left me out, or my father knew, and he had let it happen. Both options felt equally terrible. I called Marcus first because I was still, at that point, giving everyone the benefit of the doubt. Still hoping there was a simple explanation. A miscommunication. An oversight. Marcus picked up on the second ring, which was unusual. He almost never picked up quickly. Hey Rachel, I was actually going to call you this week. This week, not today, not immediately. This week. Marcus, why is Donald Park calling me about paperwork I did not know existed? And Marcus, this is the part I still think about. Marcus did not skip a beat. There was no stumble, no hesitation. He just slid right into an explanation the way a person does when they have already prepared for the question. I was protecting you from the stress, Rach. You have been so overwhelmed with work. I did not want to bring this to you until we had something concrete. Protecting me. I was a 30-year-old woman with a third ownership stake in a piece of land worth over $1 million. And my brother was protecting me from stress. Look, I want to be honest about something here, because this story is not going to mean anything if I pretend I was completely clear-eyed in that moment. I was not. Part of me, a real part, not a small part, wanted to believe him. Because Marcus was my brother. Because believing him was easier than what the alternative meant. Because I was lonely in Nashville, and the idea of my family turning into something I had to fight against was frankly terrifying. So I told Marcus I wanted to be included going forward. He said absolutely. He said of course. He said he was sorry for the confusion. And I let it go. I let it go. And that is the choice I will carry with me for a long time. Not because it ruined everything, though it did buy Marcus more time, but because I knew, even as the words came out of my mouth, that I was choosing comfort over truth. And I did it anyway. The months that followed were quieter. Marcus did include me on a few emails. forwarded me some documents from Summit Meridian, kept things surface level professional, and I tried to tell myself that the March phone call had been the turning point, that things were back on track. They were not. They were never back on track. Because while I was adjusting to a new normal, while I was doing my job and paying my rent and driving back to Clarksville on the occasional Sunday, Marcus was not standing still. Marcus was working, and I had no idea what he was building. By the summer of 2022, the Summit Meridian offer had officially expired. Marcus told us they had let it lapse on purpose, that there were better buyers coming, that the land market around Pleasant View was only going to get hotter, and we needed to be patient. He had this way of delivering information that made you feel like questioning him was the same as questioning common sense itself, not aggressive, just certain. The way a pilot sounds when they say there is turbulence ahead but everything is fine. You believe them because the alternative is too uncomfortable to sit with at 30,000 feet. My father believed him completely. My mother believed my father. And I was in Nashville, 30 miles away, watching a family dynamic that I had spent my entire life navigating start to close itself into a shape that did not include me. I started keeping notes, not formal ones, just entries in the Notes app on my phone. Dates, conversations, things that felt off. The kind of record you keep when part of you already knows something is wrong but the rest of you is not ready to say it out loud yet. July 14th, Marcus did not forward me the email from Summit Meridian's attorney. Found out about it from Dad. August 3rd. Called Marcus to ask about the independent appraisal. He said it was in process. Same answer as April. August 28th. Mom mentioned that Marcus had been to the Pleasant View land twice this month to meet with someone. She did not know who. September 6th. Dad told me Summit Meridian had reached back out. He seemed surprised I did not already know. Look, when I read those notes back now, the shape is obvious. It is almost embarrassing how obvious it is. But here is what the notes do not capture: the specific texture of being gaslit by someone who loves you, or someone you believe loves you, which, functionally, amounts to the same thing. Every time I raised a concern, Marcus had an answer. Every time I asked a direct question, he reframed it into a conversation about my stress levels, my tendency to overthink, my need to trust the process. He never yelled. He never dismissed me outright. He just redirected. Gently. Consistently. The way you would guide a child away from something dangerous without letting them know there is danger. And the most devastating part, the part I genuinely did not understand until much later, is that my mother was doing the same thing. Not because she was in on whatever Marcus was planning, but because keeping the peace was the only language she had ever known, and the cost of that language was my ability to trust what I was seeing. You are always so sensitive, Rachel. Marcus is doing his best. He has a lot on his plate. Your father is tired. Can we not do this tonight? I want you to understand something. By October of 2022, I had started to genuinely wonder if I was the problem. Not in a dramatic way. In that quiet, erosive way that happens when the people who are supposed to know you best keep reflecting back a version of you that is difficult, suspicious, and exhausting. You start to try on that version. You start to wonder if maybe they are right. If maybe the notes on your phone are just anxiety. If maybe your instincts have always been slightly miscalibrated. I talked to my therapist about it, a woman named Dr. Angela Moss, who had an office on West End Avenue in Nashville with a small succulent on the windowsill that she never watered enough, and it was always slightly drooping. I used to look at that succulent during our sessions and think, even the plant is struggling in here. Dr. Moss asked me, in her very calm and specific way, to separate what I had observed from what I had been told to feel about what I had observed. That question cracked something open. What had I observed? My name was on a deed. Conversations about that property were being had without me. My brother had been to that land multiple times to meet with an unknown party. An offer had lapsed that, by my own research, had been a fair one for the market at the time. What had I been told to feel? That I was overreacting, that I was stressed, that I needed to trust the family process. These were two entirely different things, and the moment I separated them, the fog started to lift. In November of 2022, I did something I probably should have done 6 months earlier. I pulled the deed. Not a copy Marcus had emailed me, not a summary my father had given me over the phone. I went to the Robertson County Register of Deeds website, because Pleasant View falls in Robertson County, and I pulled the actual recorded document myself. The deed listed 3 owners: Gerald Thomas Holloway, Marcus Allen Holloway, Rachel Diane Holloway, equal thirds, exactly as my father had told me when I was 22 years old at that kitchen table. But there was a second document filed in September of 2022, a limited power of attorney, signed by Gerald Thomas Holloway, granting Marcus Allen Holloway the authority to negotiate, represent, and execute preliminary sale agreements on behalf of the Holloway Family Property Trust, pending full owner consent. Pending full owner consent. I read that phrase 4 times. My father had given Marcus legal authority to negotiate the sale of the Pleasant View land. The document had been filed 2 months prior. I had never been told it existed. Now. I want to be precise here, because precision matters when you are trying to figure out if something illegal has happened or if something has merely been done in a way that is deeply, carefully wrong. The power of attorney did not give Marcus the right to complete a sale without all 3 owners signing. That pending full owner consent clause was the legal guardrail. Marcus could not sell the land without my signature. But what Marcus could do, what he had apparently been doing, was negotiate, represent, position, build relationships with buyers, shape the terms of a deal, and then, at the moment of signing, present me with something already decided and expect me to fall in line. Because that was the pattern, was it not? That had always been the pattern. Rachel will go along. Rachel will trust the family. Rachel will sign where she is told to sign. I sat with my laptop at my kitchen table in Nashville, not the wobbly-legged one from Clarksville. Mine, steady on all 4 legs. And I felt something shift inside my chest that was not grief and was not rage. It was something colder and more useful than either of those things. Clarity. The next thing I did was call Donald Park. Donald Park, who had accidentally told me about the paperwork 8 months earlier. Donald Park, who had been my father's attorney for 20 years and who was, I suspected, not entirely comfortable with what he had been asked to facilitate. I introduced myself formally, told him I was calling in my capacity as a co-owner of the Pleasant View property, told him I had pulled the deed and the power of attorney, and then I asked him, very directly, Mr. Park, to your knowledge, has any buyer made a formal offer on this property in the last 60 days? Another pause, longer this time. Miss Holloway, I think it would be best if you came in and we spoke in person. I drove to Clarksville the next morning. Donald Park's office was on Madison Street, above a State Farm insurance agency. Beige carpet, a framed photo of a fishing trip on the wall, the smell of old paper and old coffee. He was a careful man, a decent one, I think, caught between professional loyalty to my father and something that looked a lot like guilt. He told me what he knew. Summit Meridian had not walked away from the Pleasant View land. They had come back, not with a new offer through the family, but through a separate, private conversation with Marcus. A conversation in which Marcus had represented himself as the managing partner of the property and had discussed terms for a deal structured at $1.1 million. The same number they had offered before. Marcus had been negotiating, privately, without my knowledge, a sale that required my signature. And the plan, as far as Donald Park understood it, was to bring me the documents at the last possible moment with everything already agreed upon. A fait accompli. Sign here, Rachel. Do not ask too many questions. The family needs this. There is one more detail. The detail that took everything from frustrating to something else entirely. Donald Park told me, quietly, that Marcus had proposed a commission structure for himself, a management fee, 7% of the gross sale price, to be paid to a company Marcus had formed called Holloway Property Solutions, LLC. 7% of $1.1 million, $77,000, off the top, before any split between the three owners. A fee that, as far as he knew, had not been disclosed to my father or my mother. And a fee that, if I signed without reading carefully, I would have been unknowingly helping to fund. I drove home on Interstate 24 East in absolute silence. No music. No podcast. Just the gray Tennessee sky and the white lane markers and the very specific feeling of a story you have been telling yourself about your family coming apart at every seam, all at once. My brother had not been protecting me from stress. My brother had been protecting $77,000. I did not call Marcus. I did not call my mother. I did not drive back to Sycamore Ridge and sit down at the table with the wobbly leg and make anyone explain themselves. Not yet. Because here is the thing about being the person everyone underestimates. You have one advantage. They do not see you coming. And the moment you announce what you know, you lose that advantage forever. So I got quiet. And I got organized. Over the next 6 weeks, I did the boring, unglamorous, completely necessary work of building a picture. I requested a full copy of the registered deed and all associated filings from Robertson County. I pulled the public business registration for Holloway Property Solutions, LLC, which was filed with the Tennessee Secretary of State in August 2022, 2 months before I knew any of this was happening. Marcus had incorporated that company 2 months before I found out a deal was even being negotiated. Think about that. I contacted a real estate attorney, not Donald Park, who was too entangled, but a woman named Christine Adler, who had a small practice in Brentwood and had been recommended to me by a colleague at work. Christine had 20 years of transactional real estate experience and a very direct way of speaking that I found immediately comforting. Christine reviewed everything I had brought her. The deed, the power of attorney, the LLC registration, the notes on my phone going back 8 months. She was quiet for a long time, the kind of quiet that an experienced attorney uses when they are choosing their words. Then she said, "Rachel, your signature is required for any sale to close. That is non-negotiable, which means you hold more leverage in this situation than your family appears to understand." I wrote that down. Leverage, that was the word I had been missing. I had spent the past year feeling like a person things were being done to, and in one sentence, Christine had reframed the entire situation. I was not powerless. I was, in fact, the single most important person in this entire deal. Without my signature, nothing happened. No sale, no commission. No $77,000 for Holloway Property Solutions, LLC. Nothing. Christine advised me on 3 things. First, document everything. Every call, every email, every conversation. Date it, note it, save it. Second, do not confront anyone prematurely. Let the deal develop further so that Marcus's intentions become unambiguous and well documented. Third, when the moment came, have an attorney present from the very first conversation. I followed all 3 instructions to the letter. For the next several weeks, I played the role of the slightly distracted younger sister. I responded to Marcus's occasional forwarded emails with brief, non-committal replies. I called my mother on Sundays and kept the conversation light. I asked my father vague, friendly questions about the land when I visited, and he answered in the same vague, warm way he always had, which told me that whatever Marcus was doing, my father was not fully aware of the commission structure, which was, in some ways, the most heartbreaking part. Because my father was not the villain of this story. My father was a tired man in his late 60s who had built something with his hands and wanted to believe that his son was capable of carrying it forward. He had given Marcus his trust the same way he had given me my name on a deed, as an act of love. And Marcus had taken that trust and filed it as a business asset. I genuinely do not know if Marcus understood, on any conscious level, what he was doing to the people around him. I have thought about this a lot, and I think, this is my honest assessment, that Marcus had convinced himself the commission was fair, that managing the deal was real work, that he deserved to be compensated, that everyone would be better off and nobody needed to understand every detail. He had told himself a story in which he was not stealing, he was just being strategic, and that rational, self-justified calculation is so much more unsettling than greed. Because greed you can argue with. Self-righteousness does not have an entry point. In January 2023, my father had another health event, not a stroke this time, a cardiac episode, mild. He was hospitalized for 2 days at Tenova Healthcare in Clarksville and came home with new medication and a cardiologist's instructions to reduce stress. I came home. Of course I came home. I sat with my father in his hospital room and held his hand and did not say a word about any of what I knew, because the timing was wrong, because he was fragile. Because some things, no matter how urgent they feel inside your chest, have to wait. Marcus was at the hospital too. He was attentive. He brought coffee for my mother. He talked to the nurses with the same easy competence he brought to every room he entered. And I watched him. Really watched him, maybe for the first time, and I thought, he is good at this. He is genuinely good at making people feel cared for. And that made him more dangerous, not less. Because the most effective betrayals are not carried out by people who seem cold. They are carried out by people who seem warm. People you want to trust. People whose version of events is so smooth and so plausible that you almost convince yourself to sign the paper and let it go. Almost. I drove back to Nashville on the second day. My father was being discharged. Marcus walked me to my car in the hospital parking lot. Cold January air. The smell of exhaust and something antiseptic clinging to our clothes from inside. He said, "We should really get the land deal sorted soon, Rach. Dad is not getting younger. We should do this for him." I looked at my brother. I said, "I agree. We absolutely should." And I meant it, just not in the way he thought I did. 3 weeks later, Marcus sent me an email with a subject line that read, "Summit Meridian Final Offer. Need all signatures by Feb 28th. I forwarded it to Christine Adler before I had even finished reading it. The offer was $1.2 million, up from 1.1. Summit Meridian had sweetened the deal, possibly because the Pleasant View development corridor had continued to appreciate, or possibly because Marcus had done something right in the negotiation. I genuinely cannot take that away from him. The attached term sheet included, buried in Section 4, Subclause C, a management and coordination fee of 7% of gross proceeds payable to Holloway Property Solutions, LLC, $84,000. He had negotiated the number up. Christine read it and said, "Okay, now we move." I need to pause here for a moment. Because before I tell you what happened next, I need to tell you about the other thing that happened in January. The thing that was not about property or signatures or LLCs. The thing that actually broke the family. I found a text message, not on Marcus's phone. I did not have access to his phone, but on my mother's phone, because my mother, bless her, had the text notifications set to preview on her lock screen, and she had left her phone on the kitchen counter while she was doing dishes. And I walked past it, and I saw it. It was from Marcus, and it said, "Mom, just keep Rachel calm. If she starts asking questions, tell her we are handling it. She will sign when the time comes. She always does. She will sign when the time comes. She always does." I stood in my mother's kitchen. The slow cooker was on the counter, lid rattling slightly from the steam. The small television above the refrigerator was playing the local news with the volume down. And I read that sentence on my mother's phone screen one more time before it dimmed and locked. And I understood. It was not just Marcus. My mother knew. Not everything. I do not believe she understood the commission structure or the LLC. But she knew I was being managed. She had agreed to manage me. She had chosen, when it mattered, her son over her daughter. Not out of malice. I genuinely believe that. But out of the same choice I had made in that car in the parking garage 8 months earlier. The choice to take the easier road. To smooth things over. To keep the peace. To trust that it would all work out. At the cost of me. I went to the bathroom. Sat on the edge of the tub, not my tub in Nashville, my mother's, the one with the chipped enamel near the faucet that had been there since I was 11 years old. And I sat there for a while with the door closed and the exhaust fan running. And I made a decision. Not an angry one, not a reactive one, a quiet one. I would not sign a single piece of paper until every person in my family understood exactly what they had done. And I would make sure that when the moment came, there was no version of events in which I was the difficult one, the sensitive one, the one who always overreacted. I left that evening. I hugged my mother. I told my father I loved him. I waved at Marcus across the living room, and I went no contact the following Monday morning. Not with a dramatic message, not with an ultimatum, just silence. I stopped answering calls. I stopped responding to texts. I changed my work availability to do not disturb on evenings and weekends. I became, as far as my family was concerned, unreachable. And the February 28th signature deadline came. And passed. Without my signature. Be honest with me. What would you have done? Because people ask me that all the time. And I still do not have a clean answer. If you have been in a situation where you had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping yourself, I genuinely want to hear about it in the comments. Here is what no contact actually looks like. Not the version people imagine, where you are righteous and certain and finally free. The real version. It looks like your phone on a Sunday morning with no notifications from anyone in your family. And not knowing whether that silence is peace or loss. It looks like driving past a Cracker Barrel on the interstate and thinking about your father because he loved Cracker Barrel, and then sitting with that thought for 40 miles without anyone to share it with. It looks like your birthday in April, which comes and goes, and only 2 people from your family reach out. Your father's sister, Aunt Deborah, who does not fully understand what happened but loves you anyway, and a cousin named Terrell who sends a GIF and has no idea there is a war going on. It looks like grief. Even when the people you are grieving are still alive. Even when you know, with everything in you, that the decision was right. I want to be honest about the no contact period because I think people have very clean ideas about what it means to cut off a family. They imagine it as a door slamming, a dramatic exit, a final statement. It is not any of those things. It is a very long, very quiet Tuesday. Repeated. For 22 months. I built a life in that silence. That is the part I need you to understand. I was not sitting in my Nashville apartment marinating in bitterness. I was promoted at work to director of marketing. I started running. The kind of running where you are not really running for fitness, you are running because it is the only time your mind goes completely blank and the only sound is your own breathing and the pavement. I made real friends. The kind you make in your 30s when you are past the performance of friendship and you just want people who will tell you the truth. I talked to Christine Adler every few weeks, keeping the situation documented, keeping myself prepared. I talked to Dr. Moss, who kept neglecting her succulent, which kept drooping, and which became, over those 22 months, a recurring reminder that survival does not require optimal conditions, just stubbornness and the occasional bit of water. The calls from my family came in waves, first from Marcus, 3 times in the first week, then once a week for 2 months, then tapering off to silence, which told me the February deadline had passed and he was recalibrating. Then from my mother, emotional, pleading, leaving voicemails that ranged from guilt-inducing to genuinely heartbreaking. Then from my father, twice, both times brief, both times sounding like a man who did not entirely know why he was calling, but felt he should. I did not answer any of them. Not because I did not love them. I did. I do. That is the part that nobody tells you about walking away from people who have hurt you. You do not stop loving them. You just stop letting the love be used as a tool against you. In the summer of 2023, something interesting happened. Through a contact at a Nashville commercial real estate firm, a woman I had met at an industry event, I learned that Summit Meridian Properties had placed the Pleasant View land acquisition on hold indefinitely. The deal had stalled. Without all three signatures, nothing could move forward. And Marcus, apparently, had been unable to produce mine. I heard this and felt something I had not expected. Not triumph, not even satisfaction. Just the quiet, solid sensation of a door holding. The land sat. The value continued to climb. Summit Meridian stayed interested. They had to, because the development corridor around Pleasant View was not cooling down. If anything, the delay had made the property more valuable. By early 2024, Christine told me independent comparable sales in the area suggested the acreage could now support an ask somewhere between 1.2 and 1.4 million. My silence had inadvertently made the asset worth more. And then, on a Tuesday morning in November 2024 at 7:14 a.m., my mother called and said the number out loud, 1.2 million. And I stood in that lavender-scented bathroom and I felt nothing. And I thought, they need me. And I knew exactly what I was going to do. I called Christine first. Then I called my mother back. The conversation with my mother lasted 11 minutes. My mother cried twice. She told me how much she had missed me, how my father's health had been up and down, how Marcus had been working so hard on the property situation and really just wanted what was best for everyone. I listened to all of it. I said very little. At the end I said, I am willing to have a conversation about the property, but I want everyone present. You, Dad, Marcus, and I want it in person. I will drive up this Saturday. My mother said yes immediately. The relief in her voice was so complete it almost hurt to hear. I called Christine back. She said she would be available by phone if I needed her, and that she had prepared a one-page summary of every documented concern, the unauthorized negotiations, the LLC, the undisclosed commission that I could present if the conversation required it. I printed 2 copies, folded them, put them in the inside pocket of my coat. Saturday morning. Cold and gray, the way November in Middle Tennessee gets when it has fully committed to winter. I drove up Interstate 24, then Route 41A through the older part of Clarksville, past the hardware store where my father used to take us on Saturday mornings when we were kids, past the church where my grandmother still attended every Sunday without exception, and down the familiar turn onto Sycamore Ridge Road. The house looked the same. The gutters needed cleaning. The holly bushes by the front step had gotten too big. My mother's car in the driveway. My father's truck. And Marcus's Escalade, new, black, with a small Holloway Property Solutions decal on the rear window. He had put a decal on his car. The audacity of that detail still gets me. My mother opened the door before I knocked. She held me for a long time, and I let her, because whatever had happened between us, she was still my mother, and she was still, in her own limited and complicated way, trying. My father was in his recliner in the living room. He looked older. Smaller, somehow, the way people who have been ill tend to look, like the illness has taken something not just from the body, but from the way they occupy space. He reached for my hand when I sat down next to him and held it without saying anything for a moment. Rachel, that was all. Just my name. Like he had been saving it. Marcus came in from the kitchen with coffee. He looked exactly the way he always had, composed, easy, filling the room. He set a mug in front of me and sat across the table with the particular confidence of a man who believes he controls the terms of the conversation he is about to have. He said, "It is really good to have you here, Rach. I know things have been difficult, but we have a real opportunity in front of us, and I think if we all sit down and talk through it together." Marcus. He stopped. I had not planned to interrupt, but the word came out with a weight that stopped the room. "Before we discuss the opportunity," I said, "I want to make sure we are all working from the same information." I took the folded pages from my coat pocket. I placed one copy in front of Marcus and one copy in the center of the table where my parents could see it. My mother looked at the paper, then at me, then at Marcus. My father looked at the paper and did not move. Marcus looked at the paper and his face did something very specific and very fast, a micro shift, there and gone in under a second, that I would not have caught 2 years ago. A recalibration. The moment a person understands that the conversation they prepared for is not the conversation that is happening. The document was 1 page. At the top, a factual summary of the Holloway Pleasant View property ownership structure. Below that, a timeline. The unauthorized power of attorney filed September 2022. The private negotiations with Summit Meridian conducted without my knowledge or consent. The formation of Holloway Property Solutions LLC in August 2022, 2 months before I was aware any deal was being discussed. And at the bottom, 1 line, in plain language. The proposed management fee of 7% of gross sale proceeds payable to Holloway Property Solutions LLC was not disclosed to all co-owners of record. Marcus read it. He was quiet for about 4 seconds. Then he looked up and said, very calmly, "Where did you get this?" Not, "This is wrong." Not, "Let me explain." Not, "I can clarify." "Where did you get this?" Which told me everything about how he understood what he had done. My father said, "Marcus, what is a management fee?" The room went very still, the kind of still that has texture. I could hear the heating unit cycling on, the faint sound of a neighbor's leaf blower 2 houses down. Marcus started talking. And he was good, I will give him that. He was articulate and measured, and he framed everything as standard practice, as reasonable compensation for the work of managing a complex negotiation, as something he had fully intended to disclose at the appropriate time. My father listened. Then he said, and this is the sentence I will hear for the rest of my life. "Marcus, did you tell your sister?" A beat. I was going to. "Did you tell your sister?" Not a question the second time, a full stop. Marcus did not answer. And Gerald Holloway, who had built 3 properties with his hands and believed that land did not lie, sat back in his chair and looked at his son with an expression I had never seen on his face before. Not rage. Not disappointment. Something more fundamental than either. The specific grief of a man who has just understood that the trust he handed forward was used as a business tool. My mother was crying quietly. She had been crying for a while by then. She did not try to smooth it over. She did not say anything at all. And in that silence, I understood that she had already known, on some level, that this moment was coming. That the text message she let me see on her phone, whether accidentally or not, had been her own quiet way of starting to let it out. Marcus made 3 attempts to reframe the conversation. He talked about the market. He talked about all the work he had put in. He talked about family unity. I said, "Marcus, I am not here to punish you. I am here to close a deal. But I will only sign a clean term sheet. No management fee. No LLC commission. Equal thirds to all 3 owners, as the deed states. And Summit Meridian receives our unified offer by end of business Monday. You cannot just. I can. My signature is required. That is not a negotiation. That is the deed." He looked at me for a long moment. The same look he had given me at that kitchen table years ago. Patient. Slightly condescending. Except this time, it did not have anywhere to land. Because I was not the Rachel he had built his plan around. That Rachel had stopped existing in a bathroom in January 2023 when she read a text message off a phone screen and made a quiet decision. Marcus left the house 30 minutes later. He did not slam the door. He was too composed for that. He just left. The Escalade backed out of the driveway, the little Holloway Property Solutions decal catching the pale November light for 1 brief second, and then he was gone. My father asked me to stay for dinner. I stayed. The deal closed in January 2025, $1.2 million. 3 equal shares, $400,000 each, to Gerald Holloway, Rachel Holloway, and Marcus Holloway. No management fee. No LLC commission. Summit Meridian got their land. The Holloway family got a clean transaction. Christine Adler sent me a bottle of sparkling wine with a note that said, "Well executed," which, coming from her, was practically a standing ovation. My father used his share to pay off the Sycamore Ridge house entirely and set the remainder aside for medical expenses. He cried when the wire transfer confirmed, not from joy, exactly, more from the relief of a man who has spent 40 years worrying about what he would leave behind and can finally stop. My mother called me the evening the deal closed. We talked for an hour. She apologized, not with the sweeping, cinematic words you might imagine, just quietly and specifically, and in a way that felt real. She said she had been afraid of Marcus's reaction. She said she had not fully understood what was in those documents. She said she should have asked more questions. She said she was sorry she had chosen the easy road. I told her I understood. Because I did. She was not a villain. She was a woman who had spent 50 years keeping peace in a family and had not yet learned that the cost of endless peace is always paid by someone, usually the person who is most willing to absorb it. We are rebuilding. Slowly. It is not the same, and I do not think it will ever be exactly what it was. But it is real, in a way it was not before. When the performance gets stripped away, what is left is either nothing or something worth keeping. With my mother, there is something worth keeping. Marcus and I have not spoken since that Saturday in November. He received his $400,000. He did not lose his inheritance. He did not face legal action. Christine advised that the commission structure, while ethically indefensible, existed in a legal gray area given the power of attorney and the pending consent clause, and that pursuing litigation would cost more in time and family damage than it was worth. I agreed with that assessment. So Marcus walked away whole, financially. And I want to sit with that for a moment, because I think it is important to be honest about it. He did not lose everything. There was no dramatic collapse, no public exposure, no consequence that matched the scale of what he had planned to do. What he lost was quieter than that. He lost my father's uncomplicated pride in him. He lost whatever version of our family had existed before I knew what I knew. He lost the ease of being the trusted one, because trust, once you understand what someone does with it when you are not looking, does not reconstitute itself. Is that enough? I genuinely do not know. Some days I think about the 7-year-old version of Marcus who used to let me follow him around the neighborhood on my bike, who taught me how to read a box score, who sat with me in the hospital waiting room when our father had his first stroke and held my hand without either of us saying a word. And I wonder what happened to that person, whether this was always in him or whether it grew, slowly, from something smaller, ambition, maybe, or the specific loneliness of being the oldest child who is always expected to manage, always expected to lead, always expected to carry more than his share. I wonder if he ever told himself a story in which he was the one being treated unfairly. I think he probably did. I think that is the part that keeps me from hating him. Here is what I carried out of this, not the money, though the money changed my life in practical and significant ways. What I carried out was the knowledge of what I am made of when I stop apologizing for seeing clearly, when I stop mistaking peace for safety, when I stop signing things without reading them. I carried out the understanding that the most important document in my life was not the deed to that Pleasant View land. It was the note on my phone. Dated July 14th. The one I started keeping when part of me already knew the truth, but the rest of me was not ready. Trust your notes. Trust the part of you that starts keeping records before it can even explain why. My father calls me every Sunday now, not about property, not about business, just to talk. About his week. About the neighbors. About the Cardinals game he watched on Saturday. About the slow cooker thing my mother made that he thought I might want the recipe for. I always pick up. The house on Sycamore Ridge is paid off. The duplex on Fortner Avenue is still generating rental income. And the 4.8 acres in Pleasant View, the land that did not lie, is now a commercial retail development with a smoothie place, an urgent care clinic, and a parking lot where a field used to be. My father drove past it last spring. He called me from the car and described it in detail. Every storefront, every painted parking space. He said, "I did not think it would look like that." I said, "Does it bother you?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "No. I think it is just different from what I imagined, but different is not the same as wrong." I think about that a lot. Different is not the same as wrong. My family is not what I imagined it would be. The picture I built in my head, 4 people around a table with a wobbly leg, making decisions together, trusting each other with the things that mattered, that picture is gone. And something else is being built in its place. Slower, more careful, with better questions and fewer assumptions. I do not know if Marcus and I will ever find our way back to something real. I leave that open. Not hopefully, exactly, just open. The way you leave a window cracked in a room that needs fresh air, but you are not ready to fully commit to the cold. What I know is this. I know that going no contact was not a punishment. It was a boundary. And the difference between those two things is the difference between a door you slam and a door you close quietly and deliberately, because you finally understand that you are the one who gets to decide who walks through it. I know that the people who love you most can also be the ones who cost you the most, and that those two things can be simultaneously true without canceling each other out. And I know that when someone calls you at 7:14 in the morning after 22 months of silence, because they need something that only you can give, you are allowed to pick up the phone. You are allowed to answer on your own terms. And you are allowed to make sure that this time, finally, after all of it, the terms are yours. If this story reached something in you, if any part of this felt familiar, I want you to know that you are not alone. Stories like this live inside families everywhere, behind closed doors, in group chats and holiday tables and property deeds. If someone in your life needs to hear this, share it with them. And if you want to stay for more, there are more stories here. Real ones. The kind that remind you that seeing clearly is not the same as being cold. It is how you survive.